Hi everyone, today we'll be going over accounts February-March 2022, paper 2-2, question number 2. This is structured paper 2, which consists 4 questions, 2 of 30 marks and 2 of 15 marks. And we are also given a time limit of 1 hour 30 minutes. And since question number 2 is of 15 marks, we will be attempting to solve this question under 15 minutes. So without any further delay, let's get started. T Limited's statement of financial position at 28 February 2021 included the following. So we are given the equity section, which includes the ordinary share capital, share premium, and retained earnings. And we are also told that on 31st August 2021, the directors paid an interim dividend of 0.05 per share. Alright, now for the first part of this question, we need to calculate the amount paid as an interim dividend. So we're only given the interim dividend per share. Now we need to figure out the total interim dividend for the total ordinary shares. In order to figure that out, we first need to figure out our number of total ordinary shares. Let's figure that out. So total number of ordinary share. And this is just going to be the total value of ordinary share divided by its nominal rate. And we can see that the total value is 450,000. And we just need to divide it with our nominal rate, which is given as 0.50. And this gives the total number of ordinary shares to be 450,000 divided by 0.50, which is 900,000. And now we have our total number of ordinary share. So in order to figure out the amount paid as an interim dividend, we just need to multiply it with the rate of interim dividend per share, which is 0.05. Let's do that. So the amount paid as an interim dividend is just going to be the total number of ordinary share, which we just figured out to be 900,000, times the rate of interim dividend per share, which is 0.05. And this gives the total amount paid as an interim dividend to be 45,000. And this concludes the first part of this question. Now we can move towards the second one. We now need to identify two factors which directors should take into account when deciding the amount of dividend payment to shareholders. So we know that dividend is distributed out of the retained earnings or the distributable profit, right? So the first thing that the directors should take into account would be the amount of retained earnings. Let's write it down. The amount of retained earnings. And secondly, if we're talking about cash dividend, then the directors should also consider the total cash holdings available in the company, right? Let's write it down. The amount of cash available. And this concludes the second part of this question. So now we can move towards the third one. We are given additional information. On 1st December 2021, the directors made a bonus issue on the basis of 2 ordinary shares for every 3 ordinary shares currently held, and the directors wish to leave the reserves in their most flexible form. So if we see at our equity section, we were given the ordinary share, share premium, and retained earnings. And in order to leave our reserves in the most flexible form, we first need to fund our bonus shares by share premium, and if it is not sufficient, then we move towards funding the bonus shares by our retained earnings. Alright. Then for the third part of this question, we need to prepare the journal entry to record the bonus issue of shares. And in order to do so, we first need to figure out the amount of the bonus shares issued, right? So we are given the basis of 2 ordinary shares for every 3 ordinary shares currently held. So that just means that for every 3 ordinary shares, we will be providing 2 new bonus shares, right? So let's apply our unitary method. For 1 ordinary share, we will be giving out 2 by 3 bonus shares. And we have already figured out the total number of ordinary shares in the first part of this question. Let's have a look above. We figured out that we have 900,000 ordinary shares. So for 900,000, we need to figure out how many bonus shares would we issue. So that's going to be 900,000 ordinary shares. And for this amount of ordinary shares, we will be issuing 2 by 3 times 900,000 bonus shares. And this gives the total number of bonus shares to be 2 by 3 times 900,000, which is 600,000. So this is the number of bonus shares. Now we need to figure out the value of bonus shares. And always remember that bonus shares cannot be issued at a premium. So whatever the nominal rate is, bonus shares will be issued at that particular rate. So let's have a look above. We can see that our nominal rate for the ordinary share is 0.50. So our bonus shares will also be issued at this particular rate. Now we can easily figure out the value. So that is just going to be the number of bonus shares, which we just figured out to be 600,000, times the nominal rate of 0.50. And this gives the total value of the bonus shares to be 300,000. Okay, so since we are issuing the bonus share, which is essentially a capital, this is an increment in capital, right? And whenever we're talking about a journal entry, the increment in capital and liabilities are always recorded on the credit side. So this value of 300,000 will be recorded on the credit side under the heading of issued share capital. Let's write it down. So that will be issued share capital with the amount of 300,000. And remember that bonus share is not something that we receive from any outside parties. We will actually be funding the bonus shares from our reserves, right? Which are given above as share premium and retained earnings. And we can see that share premium has a value of 122,000, whereas the amount of our bonus shares issued was 300,000. So this amount cannot sustain all of this amount, right? So out of 300,000, 122,000 will be funded by our share premium. Then the remaining amount should be funded by the retained earnings, because we are trying to keep our reserves in the most flexible form, right? So the remaining value would just be 300,000 minus 122,000, which gives the amount to be funded by the retained earnings to have the value of 178,000. And this will be funded by the retained earnings, right? So these two amounts of 122,000 and 178,000 will be recorded in our journal on the debit side, because these are the sources from which our issued share capital is being funded. And the headings under which these amounts will be recorded in the journal would be share premium for 122,000 and then retained earnings for 178,000. So let's record this in our journal. We first have our share premium. And share premium gives the amount of 122,000 to fund the bonus shares. Then since this is not sufficient, so we have to utilize our retained earnings as well. And from retained earnings, we will be utilizing 178,000 in order to fund the bonus shares. And this concludes the journal entry as well as the third part of this question. So now we can move towards the fourth one. We are given additional information. On 20th February 2022, the directors paid a final dividend of 0.07 per share on all ordinary shares issued at this date. And the company's profit for the year ended 20th February 2022 was 114,000. And for the fourth part of this question, we need to calculate the closing balance of the company's retained earnings account at 20th February 2022. So in order to figure out the closing balance, I'm just going to prepare a section from our statement of changes in equity. So I'm just going to prepare the retained earnings column right here. And we will start with our opening balance, right? So the opening balance was given above. Let's have a look. So this is at the date of 20th February 2021, and we require our balance at 20th February 2022, which means that this will be our opening date. So the value at the opening date of the retained earnings is given to be 342,000. Let's write it down. That is 342,000. And we were told that we give out interim dividend, right? So interim dividend is obviously given out from our retained earnings as well, which means that the amount of interim dividend should be deducted from the opening balance of the retained earnings. So let's subtract the interim dividend. And we calculated this amount in the first part of this question. So let's have a look above. All right here we figured out the amount paid as an interim dividend to be 45,000, and this needs to be subtracted in our retained earnings column. So let's subtract this amount of 45,000. Okay. Then we also know that since share premium was not sufficient to fund the bonus issue of shares, we funded it from our retained earnings section, which means that that particular amount should be reduced from our retained earnings as well, right? So let's subtract our bonus issue. And the amount funded by the retained earnings was 178,000. So this amount needs to be reduced. Let's write it down. That is 178,000. Then we are also told that the company's profit for the year ended 28 February 2022 was 114,000. And we know that retained earnings is just the accumulation of profit, which means that this profit for the year should also be added to our retained earnings. So let's add the profit for the year. And this amounted to 114,000. But we are also told that the directors paid a final dividend of 0.07 per share, right? Which means that in order to figure out the total amount paid as the final dividend, we need to figure out the total number of ordinary shares at the date of 28 February 2022. So let's figure that out. Total number of ordinary shares. So we can start with our initial number, right, which we already figured out in the first part. Initially, we had 900,000 ordinary shares. Let's write it down. And then we issued bonus shares, which means that that obviously increases the number of ordinary shares as well, right? So we need to add that number. And we already figured out that the number of bonus shares issued was 600,000. So let's add it. And this gives the total number of ordinary shares to be 900,000 plus 600,000, which results in 1,500,000. So this is the total number of ordinary shares that we have at the date on which our final dividend is being paid. So now, in order to figure out the total final dividend, we just need to multiply our total number of shares with our dividend rate per share. And we just figured out the total number of ordinary shares to be 1,500,000. Now we multiply it with the rate of 0.07 per share. And this gives the final dividend to be 1,500,000 times 0.07, which gives the amount of the final dividend to be 105,000. And again, dividend is given out to the shareholders from our retained earnings, right? Which means that this amount should be deducted from the retained earnings. So let's subtract our final dividend. And this amounted to 105,000. Alright, this concludes all of the activities that took place within the retained earnings section. So now we can easily figure out the closing balance. So closing balance is essentially the balance at 28 February 2022. And this is going to be the sum of these five amounts. So that is 342,000 minus 45,000 minus 178,000 plus 114,000 minus 105,000, which results in our closing balance of the retained earnings to have the value of 128,000. Alright, this concludes the fourth part of this question. Now we can move towards the fifth one. We now need to state three reasons why a company sometimes makes a rights issue of shares rather than a general issue of shares. So the very first reason would be that rights issue avoids dilution of ownership. This is because rights issues are provided to the already existing shareholders, which means that no new shareholders are introduced, and that avoids the dilution of ownership. Let's write it down. Avoids dilution of ownership. And secondly, since we are catering to our existing shareholders, we do not need to deal with other outside parties, right? Which means that this is less expensive as well as faster in process. So let's write it down. Less expensive as well as a faster process. And finally, we know that rights issue increases our equity share capital, right? And that could be a reason why a company makes a rights issue. Let's write it down. To increase equity share capital. Alright, this concludes the fifth part of this question as well as the entire question. If you found this video useful, make sure you like the video and leave a comment below. And make sure you're subscribed to the channel and hit the bell icon so that you do not miss any of these videos in the future. Thank you.